As I make more of these videos, I notice some patterns emerging. I've never been the most positive guy in the entire world, and my videos are a reflection of that. While I try to only make videos on topics I'm passionate about, that passion can go both ways, and is usually shrouded in worry or disappointment. With that being said, this video isn't about a game that disappointed me, or that had me worried about its sequel. It was during the research for this video that I discovered many people don't even know of this game's existence. Of course, it's probably not a surprise to those familiar with my channel that I am a fan of the darker settings in games or movies. My favorite genre of book is dystopian literature, and a small part of me just loves seeing these imaginary worlds burn down to the ground. All this to say that this war of mine is one of the best games I have ever played. Normally we play video games to have fun or to relax from our regular lives. There are people who look forward to the competitive aspect of a game like League of Legends or Overwatch, while some people can't wait to get home and decompress while becoming completely engrossed in a different world, a different set of problems, and usually a main character with their own story to tell. Most of the time the conflict is present, but it's never trying to make the player feel anything too strongly. Story games like The Last of Us or The Division have the story as a vessel to deliver their game, but I wouldn't say that when you finish either one of those games, you leave feeling dread or despair. These games are great, don't get me wrong, and their stories are engaging and intriguing, but the point I'm making is the impact that they make on the people who experience these stories. Now, not every story needs to be a Pulitzer contender, but sometimes a game asks questions that we weren't ready to answer. It's not uncommon for games to mention things like rights for robots or use an overly extremist point of view that clearly violates human rights as the spearhead figure for the game's main bad guy. It's not a new message by any means, and while it has value in being told, there isn't anything new under the sun in this regard. And that's where this war of mine is different from its contemporaries. It's a beautiful game in its own right, but isn't trying to be a game in the same sense as the other games I've mentioned. There is no one bad guy. There is no overly extremist faction that makes it clear from the very beginning who it is you're trying to take down. There is nothing like that at all. This war of mine has its story front and center, and it's more concerned with the portrayal of a certain message rather than the player's enjoyment or removal of an arbitrary bad guy. This War of Mine is a war survival video game developed and published by the Polish game development company 11-Bit Studios. The game itself takes place in Pogoren, Grasnavia. Now, before you go looking on your map, this is a fictional setting, but the game makes it very clear what environment they're trying to imitate here. And the game even donated over $850,000 to support Ukraine in their war against Russia. Just saying. The game was released to critical acclaim globally and was praised for its ability to combine a story that tugs at your heartstrings with engaging and intuitive gameplay. At the start of the pandemic, the Polish government even announced that they have added This War of Mine as recommended reading for their students. That's right, not a book adaptation of the game, the actual video game itself. This was the first ever video game added to any such list, and it started the conversation around video games being worth more than their entertainment value. The inclusion of This War of Mine as an educational resource was the beginning of video games being able to outlive their lifespan on the shelf. When the game itself is dated, the resolution doesn't even work on whatever future computer we have, and it fails to open altogether, we will still have something valuable worth talking about. And a lot of that value comes from the characters. There are so many characters to choose from in This War of Mine, and that's not even including the fact that you can mod characters in from the Steam Workshop. I'm hesitant to count those because their stories don't collide well with the main story, but even without mods, there are more than 20 characters with roots in Pogoren who have had their lives utterly destroyed or changed. All of them have their own background. Families that have fled or died in the war, scars from their struggles to survive, and rumbles from an empty stomach that just barely made it to shelter. All of these characters have their own unique set of skills. Some are great at scavenging and can hold more items, others are good at dispatching enemy combatants or hostile bandits, and some can play the guitar. Which may seem underwhelming in comparison to the other two, but when you're alone with 3 random strangers in a war-torn city and a dead family, never underestimate what a boost in morale can do for you. The game even added kids, because apparently starving adults wasn't sad enough, and let me tell you, they are barely a step above a walking liability. You need to care for them, essentially feed them yourself, and avoid doing anything too evil or the kids will get very depressed. Did I mention that they can't really build anything, and are horrible guards, and can't scavenge? Yeah, not great for the current climate that Pogoren is going through, but I don't think there's a better way of explaining what this game is and what it feels like without actually taking you through my own personal playthrough. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Before we move into the playthrough, it's important to describe exactly what we're coming up against. There's two major parts of the game once you've picked up your character and decided to join this hellscape. There's the day, and then there's the night. While most games have the trope of the night being extremely dangerous due to hazards or enemies flooding the streets, in this war of mine, the nighttime is the only time that you can go to scavenge for new supplies. During the day, soldiers and snipers litter the high-rise buildings, preventing ordinary people from roaming around freely. Only very skilled traders, scavengers, or those with access can justify not staying inside all day, and that does not apply to your group most of the time. Once the night comes, that's your chance to go out and gather new materials, but it isn't for free. Just as you are going out to gather new resources, other bandits and looters are looking at your real estate as an opportunity for newly found riches. This is the time for you to decide which one of your members is going to sleep or guard. Now that you have the basic understanding of the game, we're finally ready to jump into the gameplay. In this next section, I'm going to show you 3 different days, 3 different milestones before reaching the endgame, and what that journey is going to look like. Pogoren, the once beautiful city now decimated into chunks of rubble and mounds of the deceased. Starting the game does not reveal much more information than that, besides a small descriptor as to what your personal characters were doing or what they have going on. And then you're just expected to figure it out. The game is a survival game at heart, and this is apparent for every moment you have. Little hands or locks show us what we can do in areas, which can include building, crafting, repairing, digging, or even smashing into some things. This is the only time that inventory does not matter when scavenging, since everything you find will go into your main storage box, which does have unlimited space. Normally, you need to be much more selective with what you decide to grab on a scavenge, but here, the best strategy is to grab first and ask questions later. Sometimes your characters can start off as sick or injured, and sometimes you can find cures for these conditions inside of your base. I would expect these items, however, to be behind either huge heaps of rubble or behind storage containers that require some persuasion to get into. Or a crowbar. Once you've gathered everything you can get your hands on, it's time to start crafting some rudimentary but essential pieces of equipment. This could be a bed, a crafting station, or weapons, or even a crude stove for some cooking. For a bit of a challenge, I decided to play as Marco all by himself, so I was only able to craft or build one thing at a time. But normally, you can have multiple people contributing to multiple goals. This decision on my part kind of bites me in the ass later on, because I could never guard my base, scavenge, and rest up while I only had Marco in my party. Not the most forgiving start in the world. Once you've made it this far, you should have a few things in place to prevent your untimely demise. You still have a few things to do at this point, and you're definitely not set up for a long time without your input, however. But this is a good time in the game to reflect how things are looking for the future and decide what you should focus on now. I never recommend to take only one type of material when scavenging, as it can cause many problems for you down the road. But due to the RNG nature of the game, and some resources being more used than others, by day 8 through 10, you should be able to identify what type of upgrades or building plans you're looking to make, and what type of resource you're missing in order to fulfill this goal. For example, components are the most used resource in the game, and when taking a look at your overall stock, you will likely have much more of them than anything else. But if you prioritize farming or water collection in the early game, or if you ended up using a lot of wood at the start, you may have a multitude of things you need to craft that mainly consume components. So the amount that you have relative to your total stock is pretty much irrelevant. Instead, you should focus on the amount of components you need compared to how many you have. This is the final milestone that we're going to talk about in this video, mainly because once you've gotten to winter in your playthrough, you have a decent idea of what this game has to offer. Winter isn't just one day, but an entire season that serves as a reminder of the hellscape you're currently in. Winter is the paradigm shift that mixes up what you have come to expect, and the value of your wood is about to skyrocket. Now, this resource wasn't required for a majority of what you were building, minus a few different things, and when it was, only required a few logs. Now, this resource that wasn't required for a majority of what you were building most of the time has become the foundation of how the rest of your run is going to go. Without a heater and wood to fuel it, your characters will slowly freeze to death. Most of the time, this looks like slowly getting sicker and weaker until not waking up anymore. This resource is essentially non-negotiable and can't be used for anything else other than fuel. So scavenging runs become about balancing how much space you need for materials and how much you can give up for wood to keep your base warm and your characters alive. Winter adds a new element to this war-torn city that really cranks up the idea of survival to a new level. Everything in this game is brutally honest, and when you finally feel like you have a hang on things, it only gets tougher and less forgiving. There are also times where the weather is clear, but multiple groups of bandits are surrounding the city's streets, making it much more likely for you to be raided or not able to make it back from an expedition. This war of mine tells us that this story isn't really fair, and all you can do is survive and deal with it. What a beautiful metaphor for life. So, is there anything you can do to better the lives of these poor people? No, not really. But you can definitely do a lot to make it significantly worse. Most of the time, making a good decision is rewarded with nothing, maybe an extra days or two worth of rations or a few gun parts. But failure can be devastating. Fail to finish your scavenging run in time and your character may not make it back. Start a fight you can't finish and your character will not make it back. Instigate with the wrong people and be prepared to never be able to return to that area again at the risk of death or injury. There are so many things in this game that just don't want you to survive, including the characters you control. That's right, even if you start a fight you can finish, your characters might decide that taking the life of another person in self-defense, or selfish defense, is not warranted. Congratulations! This person is now severely depressed, has to be fed by another person, cannot be controlled, and will be a sack of potatoes until they decide to feel better randomly on their own. Yay! And if this is the only person who can scavenge in your party, maybe the only cook you have, or the person who's best at dealing with combatants, I hope you gathered and prepared for that beforehand. I hope you enjoyed this video on one of my favorite games of all time. It's definitely a harsher experience than most people expect from a strategy survival game, but I think it's a beautiful game with an important message that just so happens to have a good gameplay mechanics. In terms of the ongoing tier list we started in a previous video, I have to say that this game is definitely higher than Brotato. So, as of this very moment, we have a new king. That's right, this War of Mine is the new greatest game of all time, and no one can tell me otherwise. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I honestly can't wait to make more videos about some of my favorite games. And maybe even some videos on games I could have done without playing to begin with. Anyway, that's all from me. I'll see you all later.